Hey there, I'm Lee Ullman here with some big news from the National Young Farmers Coalition. We're partnering with Heritage Radio Network on a special season of The Farm Report. It's all about what's happening with the Farm Bill and how it impacts farmers and eaters.
I am growing diversified vegetables on land that's been in our family for 150 years.
And so with the pandemic, gentrification, property values going up, we had to sell the land and we lost it.
Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind this massive piece of legislation that shapes how we grow our food, what we eat, and so much more.
The problems we have had, those are things that come from earlier Farm Bill and USDA policy, right? Like Earl Butz, get big or get out.
You know, it's my responsibility to know not only what I'm eating, but then like how that all came to be. And realize like, wow, like this piece of legislation, all this money, like it's technically something that I support as a taxpayer.
While Congress debates the next Farm Bill, this is not just an invitation to listen. It's a call to action. Be part of the conversation. Subscribe to the Farm Report on Heritage Radio Network, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Today's program was brought to you by 100 Bogart Street, the brand new co-working space in Bushwick, Brooklyn. Learn more at 100bogart.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. We're a member-supported food radio network broadcasting over 35 weekly shows live from Bushwick, Brooklyn. Join our hosts as they lead you through the world of craft brewing, behind the scenes of the restaurant industry, inside the battle over school food, and beyond. Find us at heritageradionetwork.org.
I like the way you do. Whoa, the way you took it so slow. And I've been so
Hey, you're listening to Eat Your Words on Heritage Radio Network. I'm your host, Cathy Erway. Today happens to be Super Bowl Sunday, and I have a fun little fact. As you're gnawing down on buffalo wings tonight, and if you're wondering why they're so delicious, you might be surprised. Actually, you might know this. It's not that big of a secret, but so the sauce, that delicious buffalo wing sauce, which I happen to think is one of the most delicious flavors in the world, is actually 50% two things. It's half part Frank's Red Hot sauce or whatever, some other brand of Red Hot sauce or Tabasco sauce is fine too. And the next ingredient is butter, and that's what makes it so delicious. So I'm really excited to be talking about all things butter with the author of Butter, A Rich History. It is Elaine Khosrova, and she's joining us today in the station. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks so much for coming down.
Great to be here.
So you came down from Butterland, Hudson, New York.
That's right, in the Hudson Valley. I actually live between two dairy farms on a dirt road up there, so I'm surrounded by the idea of butter as well as butter itself.
And you're a longtime food writer, test kitchen editor, so you've been in and around food for a long time, but you write in your introduction that, you know, you sort of always just took butter for granted. It's there, and you know, I think the most, like, one of the interesting things about butter these days too is that you find it everywhere, from high to low cuisine, greasy spoon diners to the finest chefs are making their own house-made butter and so forth. It's like a very unifying ingredient.
Yeah, but it's just the fact that it is so common and so available that makes us take it for granted. And as you said, I was guilty of that for most of my career. And it wasn't until I was working as editor of the cheese magazine Culture, this was a few years ago. And so I was getting to sample different kinds of butter from around the world and different types of butter, like higher fat butter and cultured butter and whey butter and sheep butter, goat butter. And I remember being sort of astonished at one point, realizing, wow, this is essentially one ingredient, cream, butter, fat, give or take salt, put through a really simple process of agitation. There's many different ways you can agitate, but it's just that simple.
Sure.
And so why was I experiencing some butters that were kind of greasy and others that were more firm? Some had a lot of butteriness, while others were a little flatter in flavor. There were tangy butters. There were different colored butters. So I just began to suddenly be aware of this range of experience, and I couldn't account for it as a longtime food writer. Like, what's actually going on here? So it was the craft and science of butter making that really drew me to the topic first.
And maybe that's because you were given the task of trying these different butters that were unique.
Right.
Instead of like this very homogenized staple that I grew up eating and you see everywhere.
Yes,
too.
Right. When I grew up, there was basically 2 kinds of butter in the supermarket, and they were identical. They probably were even made in the same industrial plant. But, now we have this wonderful variety of imported butters. We still have, of course, the industrial ones, and I want to make a point that we're really lucky to have such good standardized butter to some degree. I love artisanal butters. I love trying them, but the industrialized butter, especially if they come from a good sort of grass-fed milk co-op, like they do in Ireland and New Zealand, they do amazing butter. It's so consistent. Your cookies always come out the same. Your cakes, your buttercreams.
That's a feat.
Yeah. So that's really great. My book makes a point of, we shouldn't just be all about artisanal butters, even though those have become a way for dairy farmers to, have value-added product that can maybe support their lifestyle a little bit better on these small dairy farms. So it's really taking, a new direction, and actually a new old direction.
Nice, butter, any way you slice it, is such a fascinating product, which I didn't realize until reading this book. We love butter. I kind of did, but you examine butter from so many angles in this book. Societal, spiritual, scientific, and you write how the story of butter really underscores the story of us. You write, one of the oldest man-made edibles, butter's history is our history.
That's right. Yeah, because it has intersected with so much of what we are about. So, as you said, religion, spirituality. There's a whole chapter on that in my book. Agriculture, gender politics,
love those sections.
National politics, science, craft, so many ways in, way we do things and why we do things that butter has intersected with. So it's a little bit like a lens on, mankind's history through butter. And that's how it felt for me when I was doing the research. It was really, really fascinating.
So let's start with back to the basics. When people first made butter, you have this lovely passage about this nomadic family in Tibet and how they gathered the milk in the morning from a yak. Yes. And it sounded like an amazing just feat of skillfulness and carefulness dealing with the yak and bringing along a calf so she was comfortable, because these animals want to save their milk for their young.
Yes, right. It's a little trick to having the milk be let down by the mother.
Right.
But so I went to Bhutan to really witness yak butter making as it has been done for thousands of years. It really hasn't changed among the herding population in the high altitude of Bhutan. So my husband and I went there and camped alongside this family so we could see the daily ritual of gathering the milk from the yak. And it's as it was for so many thousands of years. It's women's work. Essentially, the woman in the family did all the milking. She did all the processing of the milk into butter, mostly butter, but they also made cheese sometime. The husband, honestly, I'm not sure what he did.
You're like, I'm observing him do nothing.
I know he told the dogs to tell the yak to go graze at some point, but he spent a lot of time around the fire.
Oh,
So
okay, let's talk about you. Right, and I didn't realize this either. Like when we think of butter and milk, we think of dairy maids, butter churn, and it's a woman's world.
Yes.
But you write how women single-handedly are really responsible for much of the innovations and the craft of butter making throughout forever.
Yes.
Until maybe the last, well, we'll talk about that later.
Yes, till we hit the
century.
Right, until the late 1800s. What I found in my research was that almost universally it was taboo for men to have anything to do with milking and processing milk because it was so closely connected with birthing and lactation and fertility. So it was very much a female domain. And again, this was around the world. I found this to be the case. So
crazy.
Women were they founded the dairy industry, cheese making, butter making.
And when we talk about women, we're not talking about like business women. We're talking about like people who are otherwise mothers and doing other stuff.
Farm wives, for sure. Many, many farm wives, but also the dairy maids, because being a dairy maid was one of the few jobs a woman could find, actually, outside of a home.
And did they invent butter, you think? Or wait, no. You write that butter was sort of an accident, right?
Yes. So if you go back to, Stone Age butter, we don't know for sure. We'll never really know for sure. But what we speculate is that at some point, a shepherd's family had put the milk from either, it would have been a yak or a sheep or a goat. It wouldn't have been a cow because cows were domesticated much later. But would have put that milk into an animal sack to store it and then was transporting it, presumably, on the back of an animal.
Thing, yeah.
So it would have been in an animal sack, the milk, because that's what they used to carry, the liquid they collected. And so just in transporting this sack, say, over the hill and vale, it would have been rocked back and forth. That's a form of agitation. That's a kind of churning. And so lo and behold, when they opened it up, there were these morsels of fat floating on top. And I doubt it happened in one place and then spread. I think it probably happened all the time.
Yeah. And wait, in colder climates, did they make ice cream accidentally? Churn? No?
Yeah, I doubt that.
That's fascinating. But you write that, women are credited with, preserving the milk in various ways through cheese making, butter making, salting the butter to preserve it.
Yes, it was pickled butter. So they would picture a really salty brine, and they would have mounted these balls of butter and kept them in this brine because, think of it, they didn't have any refrigeration, and at the time when milk is most abundant, spring and summer, that's when the temperatures are rising. So, and you have this sudden flow of milk and butter fat, and you have to capture it and you have to preserve it. In the wintertime, it's cold and it wouldn't have been a problem. But if you're making, butter every single day and it's June and July and August, you have to figure out a way to preserve that windfall of butter. And so heavily salting it, sometimes it was packed into firkins and molds and things, and it would have been at least 4 times as salty as the saltiest butter that we have now.
And then they rinsed it afterwards?
Yeah, they could, like you do with salted fish, you can soak it in water to try to leach out some of that salt so it's a bit more edible.
Wait, why did this not catch on as much? That sounds good. Does anybody still make salted fermented? Isn't it?
We have refrigeration now,
okay.
So nope, not so much. That doesn't really happen.
All right, so let's cut ahead. So women this is a woman's world, making butter and developing it over the years. Which,
by the way, want to mention too that it gave a lot of women in rural areas on the farm. It also helped give them a social outlet if they were going to market with their butter. This sort of fabric of their life was helped. Their social life was helped created by butter, and also women could be very entrepreneurial about it. They had beautiful molds if they wanted to sort of trademark their butter if it was good butter.
That's right. Yeah.
They would get cash in hand. They could do sort of marketing tricks as they were selling their butter. And some women went door to door and, basically caught up on the neighbors' gossip and all. So it really, like I write in my book about it, the fabric of their lives was helped by butter making.
It was greased.
Yeah, it was
by
greased
butter.
along, smoothed along. Yeah, and how much that changed when suddenly, in the late 1800s, men invaded the dairy because they wanted to beef production
up. But first, I want to get back to that point where it was taboo for men to deal with butter. And you found this around the world, that being the case.
Yes.
Was
and I witnessed it in Bhutan and in India. I was in India as well. You could still see that women were doing it all.
In the Western world, too. But
Oh, yeah. It was a little bit less so, in the early states, when the colonists came here, because there was such short little labor force and everybody had to pitch in. So there was much less sort of gender politics around it in the New World.
Was there religion politics around it too? Like you're saying?
As far as production of butter, I didn't identify that precisely.
Okay.
Not precisely. The religion and butter for me in my research was much more about how all peoples, used it as a sacred tool.
Right. It's just funny that, you think, okay, well, this is a female cow. It lactates like you do. So you...
Right.
I don't get it. But it's also a very, it's not like physically... It's not physically demanding, This is carrying stuff,
right,
milking.
Yeah, it was hard work. That's why I write about how ironic it is that dairy maids have this kind of semi-erotic,
right? What's up with
that? Reputation. This image of the dairy maid, and yet. They were strong, tough women,
Weren't they?
Yeah, they were milking in the fields. They had like a yoke they wore on a wooden yoke to carry their pails of milk, and through all kinds of weather. And they were tough. And yet they were sort of glamorized by artists, and people had this I think because they were so closely connected to fertility. It was that whole realm, and men didn't understand how women, took this liquid, went into the dairy, and then it emerged as butter and cheese. Like they knew women could do this, and to some degree they took it for granted, of course. But there was a little bit of this like magic, like what's going on in there? How do they do this? So I think that plays into the stereotype of the dairy maid.
And the associations continue to this day. I was looking at this little packet of butter, Land O'Lakes, the other day, and I was like, dude, what is up with this like Native American girl on the cover? I want to talk a little bit more about that. Like what happened after the mass marketing and industrialization of butter. But you see those relics of that female association.
Oh, yeah. You see it around the world.
Okay, so right after a quick little commercial break, and be right back chatting more with Elaine Khosrova.
100 Bogart Street is finally open and ready for Bushwick. 100 Bogart is a brand new, state-of-the-art co-working space that provides turnkey workspaces, including open layout desks, meeting spaces, and furnished private offices. Members have access to top-notch amenities such as custom furniture, high-speed internet, spacious kitchenettes with coffee and tea, printers, scanners, and much more. Alongside their professional work environment, 100 Bogart also provides exclusive educational programming for any curious entrepreneur. Heritage Radio Network has made their new office home at 100 Bogart and will host many events there in the future. For more information about their co-working space, visit 100bogart.com and become a member to network, create, and educate.
Your lips are parched, please do not quench them with your tears. For I'll return with lips.
All right, we're back chatting more with Elaine Khosrova. She's written Butter, A Rich History. We love this book. We were just talking about how butter, okay, now we're talking about the ascension of butter from this traditionally, farm wives product into the Industrial Revolution. You're right that it was a very relatively quick leap for this product to go from an artisanal, I guess we could say now, product to a mass-produced one.
Yeah, when you think that butter had been made more or less the same way for thousands of years, and then suddenly along came this invention called the cream separator, and that really just revolutionized the entire industry, because now farmers, dairy manners, small or big, didn't have to wait the 24 to 36 hours it took for cream to traditionally, to rise to the top of the milk. Milk would be set in pails and pans and troughs, and people would have to wait this very long time for the cream to rise to the top, at which point then it could be skimmed off, and then you kept collecting those skimmings until you had enough to make butter. So that's the way it was done for many years. Although I will say, in places like India and Bhutan, they churn the whole milk. They would ferment whole milk like a yogurt type product and churn the whole milk. But, in Europe and in the States, the tradition was always to skim the cream off.
Huh.
So along came this cream separator in the late 1800s, and suddenly you could have fresh cream. That was more or less a new product, fresh cream, because it works by centrifugal force. So you put the milk in, and because of the different weights of the fat, the molecular weight, the fat comes out one spout and the more liquid portion comes out the other, and now you suddenly have fresh cream.
Wow.
So that really,
advanced.
yes. And what's interesting is the Chinese figured this out something in like 900 AD that you could do this, but it didn't hit the dairy world.
Wow.
Until that many centuries later.
Were they using that for milk, for cream, for butter?
No, not in China. No,
But
they understood how using centrifugal force could separate things. So the theory of centrifugal force was ancient, but it didn't hit the dairy world till late 1800s. So I write my book about it. Suddenly, butter leaves the farm. It's not profitable anymore for wives and dairy maids to make it there. So it makes more sense for them to just collect their milk, put it in the wagon, bring it to a local creamery. So because of the separator, these local creameries suddenly appeared. They were a new thing where farmers came along and got paid for their milk by the pound. And that at the creamery, they had the separators and they could just make it right there. I mean, there were farmers who got a small separator and still did it at home. It wasn't just like universally gone. But, it shifted
things. That's the
things.
most profitable way to do it.
Right.
Most efficient. So also to compare butter making then throughout much of history and now, we have cows that produce more milk.
Lots more milk. Like thousands of gallons more milk in lactation. And has everything to do with breeding. Tons of, innovation as far as breeding and many generations of cows. I think you might have this. My brain doesn't exactly remember this stat, but I compared a 14th century cow lactation to modern, and it's just off the charts difference.
Wow. Yeah. And also, you didn't have to herd, or you didn't have as many nomadic herders trying to capture this, yak and then bring along a calf. But you write that Holsteins is typically the most high-yielding milking cow.
Right.
But smaller farms, more artisanal ones that look for flavor, perhaps over yield. You write that Dan Barber of Stone Barns and Blue Hill was trying out making like single breed cow, single udder butters to see which one was best.
Yes, yeah. I haven't gotten to sample them, but I think his contention was
butter.
Single udder butter. I can't say that very fast. His contention is that absolutely there was a difference. It makes sense because the health of a cow, the period of lactation that she's in, what she's eating, all these things, there are many subtle variables that affect a butter and the milk fat, within the milk, the volume and the quality, so forth. Yeah, and there are breeds, if you want to make cheese and make butter, Holstein is generally not the best breed for you.
Okay.
You want Jersey or Guernsey cows, and in Europe there's Brown Swiss. There's other ones.
Hawthorne Valley was using the Brown Swiss near you.
Yes.
Okay, in Hudson.
Yeah. He's a German farmer, so he was partial to I think, mostly I see a lot of Jersey cows among butter makers and cheese makers.
That's interesting. Do you know if there's any like rising star breed for today's, I guess?
Well, you're seeing more Guernsey
tastemakers?
too.
Okay.
Guernseys have a beautiful milk. It's almost tinged a little bit golden because they have a high quantity of milk fat in there, and also, the goldenness of it has to do with how much beta carotene is kind of hidden in
grass,
the milk.
right?
The grass that they're fed. So that has a lot to do with the color, how they're fed.
So more and more, or I don't know, what is the state of grass-fed milk nowadays? You said it's becoming more popular.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And it's still, a farmer can, feed their herd a little bit of grass and call it grass-fed.
Sure.
There's no real regulation around it. You really kind of got to do your research. If it says grass-fed and grass-finished and pastured, if there's all these kinds of
Those are terms
statements you have to look for if you want the real thing. I think it's a label that's easily corrupted out there, and you don't exactly know what you're getting. But there is a difference nutritionally, and if you also believe politically in animals being out on grass and eating what their nature is to eat. It's worth doing the homework. But
I find it interesting. I didn't realize this, but nowadays most cows are not, fed. They're weaned from their mothers, and they're not given the milk because why? Right. We're taking the milk from it too. So and they're also artificially inseminated too. So all these things are.
It's a real factory.
Yeah,
it really truly is a real factory. That's why when I've sometimes been confronted by vegans as a butter writer, I know they have a really good point. They really, the industrial model of keeping animals it's shameful in my view. But there are alternatives, and not everyone is doing that.
Right.
And as you know, I live up in the Hudson Valley, and many dairy farmers who love their animals and treat them well and let the calves nurse with the mother, and do this negotiation that has gone on for centuries because people, especially people in northern climates, absolutely needed animal products to survive. They didn't have the growing season. They had to have animal products, but they had to take care of the health of those animals at the same time. So they learned, the best practices in negotiating with this creature, so they both could survive.
Right. And be healthy.
Right. So there is a model out there. It's, it's rare, but there is a model out there.
In general, if butter is more yellow or golden, does that mean that they've been eating more grass that season, or because the beta carotenes?
Yes,
so that is a thing
in general.
Okay,
but people should know that goat butter and sheep butter will always be white, and that has to do with the way the animal takes the beta carotene in their feed in the grass and converts it to vitamin A, which is colorless. So it still has good nutrition because vitamin A is, vitamin A, and beta carotene is a precursor to vitamin A. But it won't ever be yellow.
Okay.
Some producers, there's a producer in England that naturally colors their goat butter so it doesn't look so white because it tends to look like lard. And it's not as appealing. People definitely like yellow butter.
Yeah.
And so you sometimes see, a little natural food coloring, annatto on the goat butter.
We didn't talk too much about this. Okay, that's one of the big differences, I think, between the fake margarines and oleo products. Has that crazy weird golden color and also that unnaturally smooth consistency.
Yes, yeah.
So the last century was not very kind to butter. I mean, in a popular culture, it was thought to be not good for you, it was certainly not fat free.
Yes.
And it's come around though.
It really took a beating in the 20th century. I grew up in the second half of the 20th century. Well, I grew up in the 70s, and fat was just demonized, any kind of fat, but particularly saturated fat. And so, that's when margarine really started to take over the market. Because, it seems so healthy. It's vegetable oil product, right? What could be wrong with that? But now we know, that when you take vegetable oils and you adulterate them, to make hydrogenated fat, which is turning a
trans fat,
right, turning a liquid oil into a solid fat, as they do with margarine, is creating these trans fats. So, there we were, so many people eating what they thought was healthier that was actually doing them a lot of damage. And we see still the results of that today. I mean, heart disease, really, we've hardly made any progress, as far as people having less heart disease. What we've gotten good at is like stents and bypasses and the plumbing around the heart, but actual heart disease, because so much of our food supply has been corrupted with sugar and trans fats, which really, those are two risky things when you talk about the health of your arteries. And so it's not butter per se. In fact, real good grass-fed butter has things that actually protect you from heart disease, believe it or not. There's so much amazing information now coming out about saturated fat and what a big category of fat it is, and how, anybody that just sort of lumps it all together and says, oh, it's not good for you, really it either doesn't know what they're talking about or is just not telling you the truth. But I have a degree in food nutrition. It's an old degree. It's from when I was told to tell people not to eat fat. But I am able to kind of work through these articles and research papers to understand all the cool stuff now. And it's just wonderful. But I want to pull my hair out because you still go to the store and there's all these low fat, no fat labels everywhere. We're still stuck in that to some degree.
We've still been brainwashed to some degree.
Yeah, and actually the medical establishment seems like the last to come along. Like there's still so many doctors that say, stay away from butter.
There's so much more to talk about, but the interesting thing, I think, I've read a lot about the controversy of good fat, bad fat, butter is good for you, bad for you anyway. But what you bring to this debate is a really interesting the gender politics of it, because for so long, butter was a woman's product, and then when men came along and industrialized it, there was many studies you saw, or like some sort of articles, and what did you write? Historical records of the time with disparaging remarks about dairy women's backward customs, how they interfered with the advancements and so forth. And you write that the advancements and also the margarine revolution was sort of like a man's world type of thing.
Absolutely. And it was all about creating this big, giant commodity. Women were really never about that. Making more and bigger production. Of course, they wanted to make money and do well.
And it's a cheaper product, emptier of...
Well, and the other thing, people don't know, and I didn't know till I did my research, was that one of the reasons margarine started to take off, and this would have been in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was because there was so much bad butter out there. Butter that would spoil.
Not consistent
butter. And if you were a person, with little income, the best you could afford was bad butter. Rancid butter, could be dirty, just not good butter. And then margarine, which at that time was made from beef fat. It was made originally from beef fat and milk and salt and a little bit of coloring. So it was actually a pretty natural product. Didn't have the trans fats that we created later on. So that was partly why people took to margarine.
Yeah.
So
it's also golden and glowing there like a halo effect.
Right. Add enough annatto, it's really yellow.
Well, we've come such a long way in our butter evolution. I can't wait to see where it goes next. And I know that there's so much more to talk to you about. It sounds like looks like we're out of time. Oh man, I hope you come out with a sequel though.
Oh well,
I'd like to see
there's
more.
There's a lot of butter traditions in North Africa that I really wanted to research. I have a little bit of that in my book, but yeah, I'd love to do more on this topic. It's amazing.
This is an amazing topic. I hope everyone gets their hands on Butter, A Rich History. It's out in paperback now, so no reason not to.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Elaine, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone at Heritage. We'll see you next week on Eat Your Words.
Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. For our freshest content and to hear about exclusive events, subscribe to our newsletter. Enter your email at the bottom of our website, heritageradionetwork.org. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at heritage_radio. Heritage Radio Network is a nonprofit organization, driving conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place. And we couldn't do it without support from listeners like you. Want to be a part of the food world's most innovative community? Rate the shows you like, tell your friends, and please join our community by becoming a member. Just click on the beating heart at the top right of our homepage. Thanks for listening.
That I ain't never had no loving like this before.